All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's APBP webinar. This is a webinar about green lanes, and we are very pleased to have you with us today. My name is Kit Keller, Executive Director of the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals. Today's topic is rapid implementation and pilot projects, and this is the fourth in a series of Green Lane webinars. We hope that if you're joining us for the first time, you'll go ahead and review the earlier webinars because they were very well done and very interesting. APBP is grateful to the Green Lane Project for supporting this webinar, and we're pleased to have Zach Vanderkoy on the webinar today, and he'll be giving us a brief introduction. And I will ask the presenters who are not speaking to mute their line. Today's presenters are Anik Baudet, AICP Capital Program Consultant for the City of Austin, and Kyle Wagenschutz, Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator for the City of Memphis. We'll have an introduction from Zach Vanderkoy, Green Lane Project International Programs Manager, and that's at People for Bikes. I'd like to show each of the presenters' bios, but I will not read them. Many of you have met Anik in the past. She did serve as the City of Austin's Bicycle and Urban Trails Program Manager, and under her leadership, quite a bit of good work occurred in Austin. And many of the projects and procedures that she developed were very informed by a planning process that reflects her skill set. And it's very interesting, as many of you know, people come to the world of bicycle and pedestrian work from many different backgrounds, and Anik holds a degree in both urban geography and kinesiology and is working toward a Master of Public Administration. Kyle Wagenschutz is a very entertaining speaker. I was just reminiscing hearing him speak at the American Society of Landscape Architects about a very topic that he'll discuss today, and he has been very first bicycle pedestrian coordinator for the City of Memphis, and he began that work in 2010. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Zach Vanderkoy to offer words of introduction. Zach?
Great, thank you, Kit. My name is Zach Vanderkoy. I'm with the Green Lane Project, and what the Green Lane Project is a campaign to take this really great tool, protected bike lanes, and get it into the U.S. toolkit to help city practitioners, help consultants, help others figure out how to get these projects on the ground more quickly and in higher quality. We are talking about protected bike lanes, so some type of physical barrier between moving cars, people on bikes, and sidewalks. It's this kind of new type of bike facility that has very rapidly evolved into becoming a tool for cities to work with on their big, busy streets. So our project works with 6 cities at a time. Austin and Memphis were part of the first cohort of cities. And what we do is help these practitioners in these cities figure out the different challenges and obstacles that come up with implementing protected bike lanes, from the design side, from the political leadership side, and even from the kind of internal and external process side. And these cities have learned a lot in a very short time about how to build protected bike lanes. So that's what the impetus for this partnership with APBP has been. We wanted to share some of this detailed, insider wonky information that these leading cities have learned about getting these lanes on the ground with everyone. So this is the 4th webinar in this series. The others looked at things like transit access and protected bike lanes, intersection designs, accessibility issues. So there are now nearly 200 protected bike lanes on the ground in the U.S. And as we are moving more toward thinking about them as parts of networks rather than individual projects here and there. And with that comes a need for new tools for getting them on the ground more quickly. So I think this webinar is going to be really interesting, not only if you are thinking about protected bike lanes, but other types of projects that are typically on a pretty long timeline, to look at some of the tools and techniques that cities are using to get them on the ground more quickly. So these are two of the best at it. So we're really excited to hear what they have to say.
Great. Thank you, Zach. And with that, we'll begin by passing controls over to Anik Baudet. Anik, you'll see a show my screen message.
Okay, thank you, Kit. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining in, and thank you for the introduction and the information about the Green Lane Project. It was an honor to be part of the first cohort of cities, and thanks to the webinar team for making this possible. My presentation this afternoon will have these 4 parts, starting with defining what rapid implementation of bicycle infrastructure meant and means for Austin, Texas. Then the bulk of my presentation will be a focus on these 4 processes that have facilitated our ability to move fast with installation of bicycle facilities of all types, from bike lanes and then growing into the best practice of protected lanes. I'll end talking about how Austin has used the, quote, pilot concept for projects and some photos that illustrate the outcomes we've achieved using these processes. So what does rapid implementation mean for Austin? Well, since 2007 to today, we've put in approximately 164 miles of the bicycle network, including new bicycle lanes, better bicycle lanes, 4 miles of green lanes or cycle tracks, and approximately 19 miles of multi-use trails or urban trails, as we call them in Austin. So now let's turn our focus to 4 standard operating procedures for rapid implementation that are key to Austin's progress. We establish good ways to get things done fast around small projects, cyclical street resurfacing, public input, and large projects. So let's focus first on small projects. We had a problem. The problem was stemmed from our sidewalk program at first, and then we found the problems were also relevant to our bicycle program as it matured. And the problems were twofold. We had high overhead costs and very long project schedules. Said another way, the problem was that there was slow progress on small improvements that make a big difference in the community. The solution was found in changing our contracting approach for small projects. We employed indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracting, or IDIQ contracting for short. This type of contracting was piloted about 10 years ago in the city of Austin. We started with small contract amounts, under $1 million, and with the success of the process, the city of Austin is now quite comfortable with larger contract amounts and has executed many larger dollar contracts over the years. IDIQs help streamline the contract process and speed construction of small bicycle and sidewalk infrastructure projects. This type of construction contracting is better suited to smaller and more straightforward construction jobs in the right-of-way. And the contract includes common bid items for sidewalk and bicycle facility construction. And the prices for the bid items are negotiated with the contract. So for example, commonly used construction bid items to construct small bike and ped projects include curb ramp installation, poured concrete, street striping, traffic control, bus pads, revegetation, and landscaping, just to name a few. Once the contract is in place, small projects are brought forward under the contract and bids are made per project by the contractor based on estimates provided project by a field engineer. Payments are then made for each small project under the contract based on only the quantities used for the project. So for example, a $2 million IDIQ contract can yield dozens of small projects over the life of the contract. The IDIQ design process is also very simple. There's no full survey or plan sets necessary because work is limited to existing city design standards. The focus is on field engineering, and that means that the engineer, the contractor, inspectors, and others involved with the project will walk the site, develop custom solutions to constructability, and all questions are pretty much answered before the meeting is over out in the field. Then an engineer is available on call during construction. The keys to starting an IDIQ process to accelerate your bicycle and sidewalk projects are in the areas of staff buy-in and change management throughout the organization. In Austin, we worked with project management staff, contract management staff, and also with the private sector construction contracting community to introduce the concept and work towards creating standards around this new way of doing business. It's not always easy introducing new processes, but it can be done. Another key ingredient is input from a RAS, a Registered Accessibility Specialist, to assure that appropriate ADA review is happening with the process. So that would be one of the professionals involved in the field engineering process at the beginning of scoping a small project. The results of IDIQ contracting on small bicycle project implementation are impressive. They include lower costs, lower overhead, better quality bicycle projects, and by this I mean that the process allows the bicycle program to move curbs and or make other slight road geometric changes that can enhance bicycle project design when, say, you're following your resurfacing program. It results in accelerated schedules. It also results in flexibility in project selection over the life of the contract and an ability to react faster to public requests. And this is an area I'd like to highlight because with this process there is the ability to allow for bicycle and sidewalk projects to coordinate and work hand in hand as needed. Oftentimes the success of a bicycle project is more likely if sidewalk concerns are addressed at the same time. So this cycle track project is an example of that. Here sidewalk and bicycle improvements came together. This is Bluebonnet Road in Austin, Texas. The two improvements came together as a result of a public process. Parking was removed from this side of the street, causing new pickup and drop-off traffic patterns for the adjacent elementary school. Because of the change in traffic patterns, a need for a sidewalk near another school entrance was identified, and the city was able to deliver the entire package of improvements, making the bicycle project parking discussion a much easier one. Success with this process for small projects did not happen overnight, but Austin progressed with the idea through slowly gaining colleague and management buy-in to the IDIQ process, starting with small contracts, as I said, and building the experience to larger contracts as we in the contracting community became more comfortable with the process. It has proven to be the way to go with small improvements. I recently attended a Strong Towns seminar. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Strong Towns movement. It focused on the future of transportation and the funding dilemma. The message was a strategy for cities to make, quote, many small investments over a broad area over a long time period. IDIQ is certainly a tool cities can use to allow multiple small investments over a broad area quickly and over a long time period, resulting in an aggregate of small projects that can be an active transportation game changer in your community. So street resurfacing. This is probably not a new concept to many of you. In Austin, the city has been using this tool for over 10 years, and the years of experience has allowed the coordination process to evolve and improve to facilitate the installation of, on average, 35 linear miles of the on-street bicycle network over about an 8-month period each year. We are able to go fast because the in-house team has a working knowledge of the data needed for area engineer review of striping plans, and because we have a standard process for public input to complement this process, and I'll talk more about that in a few slides. In the early years, the bicycle program was a follower, having no real choice in streets to be resurfaced, often resulting in sporadic and disconnected bicycle lane installations. Not a good way to go about building a network. Over time, the Public Works Department resurfacing program evolved and improved their 1-year and 5-year plan, basically. And this was somewhat encouraged by our Public Works Director, who did participate in a 2012 Green Lane project study tour and had a keen interest in enhanced coordination between the two programs, knowing that it was a really efficient way to get a good portion of the network on the ground for not a lot of cost. Today, there's a two-way communication with the bicycle program staff having the ability to inform the resurfacing locations to allow for more connected network sooner. So what does that process look like? The process involves review of the resurfacing 5-year plan starting in about December each year with a focus to the upcoming summer plans for resurfacing, or a focus to the 1-year plan of the 5-year plan. The review includes a technical assessment, a network assessment, and a political assessment of potential problems that could arise that could stall the resurfacing plans. Once the review is complete, a negotiation with the resurfacing program staff begins. Discussion can include lengthening a segment, a block, to make a better sense for the bike network, or it can also include a request to move a segment 2-3 years out into future years of the plan if there are some politically sensitive areas that need more time. Once the list is decided, in-house striping plan design starts, and once the warmer weather arrives, construction starts. So this sounds pretty straightforward. However, there's a key factor to the success of this tool for rapid implementation, and it lies in a public input process we devised to complement the bicycle network installation through street resurfacing. This process is embodied in the City of Austin Bicycle Program Parking Modification Guidelines. This process provides a consistent way to reach stakeholders who are affected by parking modification for a bicycle project. It was adapted from the notification process used for city zoning and rezoning cases. This replica of the zoning notification process proved successful in Austin in that when stakeholders complained that the notification was not adequate, we would explain that it was the same process used by the planning department to rezone properties, and it was amazing how well that worked to neutralize that element of opposition. The opposition could then turn to the project itself and the parking modification proposed, and in that case, we had data-driven information to share about the parking on the street, and we know that data-driven processes often lead to success in project implementation. So by eliminating process issues and having consistent data-driven decisions about parking modifications, we found that we could have small planning processes around small project implementation that allowed us to move fast, maximizing the use of the annual street resurfacing schedule. So before I explain the actual public process in more detail, I'll quote Alexina Chapman, one of our City of Austin bicycle network designers. She says that parking modification guidelines provide a, quote, framework for steps forward when there is opposition to a project, end quote. And since opposition to bicycle projects is often the norm, this process has been key to diffusing opposition to a workable level. So now let's focus on how the process works in a little more detail. Each segment that we do with the resurfacing in our mini process to remove parking or make other changes is about a 6-month average process. Sometimes they can take a little bit longer, but on average 6 months. So remember that our street segment projects are decided in December or so. So the in-house design starts around then, and so there are many of these processes going on simultaneously, basically January through September each year. The process starts with in-house traffic data collection, including parking counts. The parking modification guidelines have robust guidelines, consistent robust guidelines on parking modifications based on observed and recorded parking use at varying times. And for example, if there's less than a 10% utilization of parking on a street, the designers might recommend full removal of the parking as a tool as they think about what type of bicycle design or retrofit might be appropriate. And then it goes on to give recommendations when there's higher parking use. Parking is just one aspect to the design, as you all know, so other data is also gathered early in the process to assure the best design and assure the area engineer has all the data that they're going to need to make their final decision quickly. Once the draft design is approved, stakeholders are notified by regular mail, just like in the zoning process, and by email for some stakeholders. We have a community registry that allows us to notify some stakeholders by email. In that notification, there'll be a cross-section of the existing roadway and then what's proposed, a date for an open house where folks could come and discuss the design and look at it. We do provide it in Spanish, or we do provide a Spanish translation. And sometimes one open house is enough, sometimes two, sometimes more, but usually 1 or 2 in that average 6-month time frame. So in summary, a streamlined street resurfacing program that's working a two-way street between the bike program and the street resurfacing program, working hand in hand with a solid public process embodied in the parking modification guidelines, and assisted by IDIQ contracting when needed, has proven a recipe for success in rapid implementation of a quality bike network for Austin. We also have standard operating procedures that have been enhanced around large projects. So working hand in hand with small projects are the construction of larger active transportation capital improvement projects. These larger signature projects are also needed to complete the bicycle network, and they come in many forms, including large bicycle and pedestrian bridge structures, road reconstruction or road extensions that could include protected facilities, and end-use facilities such as bike rooms and shower facilities for new city building structures such as libraries or administrative offices. In the recent past, the City of Austin has taken steps to improve long-range capital planning, which will be of benefit across the capital program, also bringing benefit to the bicycle and pedestrian programming needs. The capital program process enhancements stem from the recent adoption of a new comprehensive plan for our city, which we call Imagine Austin. Our city manager, Mark Ott, wanted a stronger connection between our capital program and implementation of Imagine Austin through infrastructure investment. He created a capital planning office with a focus on a few key areas related to our capital program, including coordinating long-range project planning across the city. And I'll also mention that Mr. Ott participated in the People for Bikes Green Lane study tour to Holland also in 2012 and was very much inspired by how infrastructure can really, investment in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, what he said was he now had a context. He could put it in context and really had a better understanding of that connection that's needed between our capital program and our city policies and city goals and visions. In the realm of large projects, we also rely at the City of Austin on processes related to private development and public-private partnerships to help build the bicycle network. And we have been able to realize great outcomes through those experiences as well and those processes. So if anyone is interested in learning about those processes particularly, you can contact me offline. Lastly, I'll talk about pilot projects. And it's interesting, Kyle and I have a different take on this. In Austin, pilot projects have been more of an internal tool to create internal buy-in and a tool for change management, more so than we've used it as an external tool to calm public perception about new bicycle projects. However, it's not to say that Austin has not used the pilot concept publicly as a consensus building tool. We have, but just not as much as we've used it internally towards change management and just doing things differently as we've been working very fast to create our multimodal system. Our use of pilots as for internal buy-in and internal processes are exemplified through a 2008 road diet or road right-sizing project. That was one of the first ways we used a pilot. We've used it, of course, for cycle track implementation, intersection treatments, other types of unique applications. And we also used the FHWA RTE, request to experiment process at one point as a way to get, this is kind of funny to say, sharrows on the ground that were, a big deal for us back then to get those on the ground. And so now I'll turn to a few images to illustrate the outcomes of some of these processes, and then I'll hand it over to Kyle. So this is an example of the big, large signature projects and quick, rapid implementation on street coming together. The bridge in the foreground, it was a long process, over $1 million project, bike ped bridge over a creek connecting a multifamily community to an elementary school. And then the quick turnaround on the protected lane went in, and they both complement each other nicely, but night and day on the length of time to put in both. But the point is you have to be working on both to create your network, the small and the large projects. This is Guadalupe Street near the University of Texas, and we used our IDIQ contract to create this beautiful bicycle and pedestrian improvement project. This is a cycle track downtown, and this was the use of a public-private partnership. The street was scheduled for reconstruction. That included this protected lane, and the adjacent hotel that was going in thought that our schedule was not up to par, and so we worked out a deal, and they were able to get this construction in really quickly through a public-private partnership. Basic better bike lanes, buffered lanes through our street resurfacing project, Here's an example of a road right sizing and the use of the FHWA RTE process to get color lanes on the ground. This was right before they were accepted into the MUTCD. And then this is a highlight. We have a lot of quasi-arterial collector streets in Austin that need bike facilities, and parking was an issue, and especially in the older parts of town. This is a primarily African-American community, and lots of churches with not a lot of parking, and our parking modification process was really put to the test here and proved to be successful in creating many planning processes around pockets of parking constraints for success in our bicycle network. Finally, this was our first road diet, road right sizing project where we used a pilot as an internal tool. It involved an intensive traffic study. We spent $100,000 on a traffic study. Anything you would want to know about anything that could happen in an engineer's worst fear about right sizing, we have embodied, and we're happy to share that in this study. Cut through traffic, turning movements, bike pedestrian counts before and after. It's an extensive before and after study. And this is still in today. The results were outstanding and positive. Another large project we have in the works, this is under construction now, removing a huge barrier between Southwest Austin and downtown. And then finally, this is a protected facility that was put in through negotiations with the development process on a really busy street. And we continue to work that process. Austin is in a development boom right now, and so our ability to get things done fast through that process is nothing to sneeze at. And so with that, I will hand it over to Kyle. Thank you for your attention.
All right. Thank you, Anik. Great presentation. Really appreciate that. And next, before we go to Kyle, we will show a poll because we would like to know how many of you are watching together in the room. So bear with us while we launch the poll, and we would like for you to take just a moment to respond and let us know how many people are watching with you at your location. We have about half of you voted so far, so keep coming. Excellent. You're good voters. All right. Super. So one more second, and we'll go ahead and close the poll. Last call for votes. All right. We'll close the poll and then share the results. So you'll see the results on your screen. And with that, I will transfer the controls to Kyle. So Kyle, you should see them coming to you. Kyle, do you see the screen?
I do see the screen, but I don't have control.
Okay.
Have you closed the poll?
Let me go ahead and close that poll. Thanks, Ted. Good tip. All right, now it should be clear.
There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hello from the cold and dreary city of Memphis, Tennessee today. I'm Kyle Wagenshoes. I'm glad to be here, and thank you to Kit and to Zach and Anik for getting us started on a great conversation today. I'm really excited to be speaking about this because it's a process and a program here in Memphis that we've been utilizing for the last couple of years to really rapidly implement a growing bicycle network. Over the last 3 years, Memphis has created more than 80 miles of new bicycle facilities in the city, including about 5 miles of protected bicycle lanes. And as a result of that, bicycle use is up across the city, accident rates continue to fall, and we've also been very successful in securing federal and state transportation grants that are going to allow us to double the size of our network again by 2016. And the size of that network is going to increase the size of our protected bike lane network to about 22 miles during that same period of time. So we've been going from 0 to quite a bit in a very short period of time. Many of the strategies that we're using here are very similar to what's going on in Austin. Through our partnership with the Green Lane Project and through close coordination and communication with our staffs between the two cities, we've been able to learn a lot from each other, and we're using many of the same processes that they are. So like Austin, the staff here is working diligently to revise a lot of our internal processes to ensure that bicycle accommodations are made as a standard part of ongoing activities. Through close coordination with our Public Works Department, our operations team, we're able to review everything that's happening in the city as an opportunity to add new bicycle lanes, calibrate signal detection, replace storm grates with bicycle-friendly designs. Those kinds of things really make the implementation easy. Through institutionalizing a lot of our decision-making, we're making sure that bicycle facilities are included as a part of our standard operating procedures and considerations when we do land development, when we reconstruct roadways, when we redesign roadways. We have a lot of new internal tools that we're using to make sure that the bike ped coordinator, like myself, or the bike ped program isn't the sole responsible agency for making sure that bicycle considerations and accommodations are being met. A more recent approach, though, to rapid implementation, particularly on corridors where public input is crucial to the success of the project, are the use of pilot projects. And Anik mentioned this a little bit, but in a little bit of contrast to Austin, we are mostly utilizing this approach as a direct mechanism to engage members of the community and shape the dialogue around a temporary reconfiguration of the roadway, allowing both for more robust public dialogue to take place and for city staff and officials to measure the tangible impacts of these temporary changes. The approach that we're basing our pilot program on is referred to as the Ready, Fire, Aim approach. This approach flips the script on traditional planning processes, processes where a concept plan might be identified, some preliminary design work or renderings are produced, public meetings are held, oftentimes poorly attended, funding is sought and approved, construction takes place, and on the back end, after you've spent all this time, effort, and money building a process, then you get public backlash because people aren't happy with what's actually took place. That process can drag out over years, and it can make future projects and future successes, particularly for bicycle development, difficult to do in our cities. So if a project is of little consequence, the pilot approach can sometimes work without pushback from the community. But too often with the traditional planning process, we hear complaints regarding the lack of opportunity to provide public input and design changes being forced upon the public by local government. This approach, the traditional approach, really allows, really prevents a city from building upon successes here. The pilot approach, however, allows for this traditional funding mechanisms to move at their standard pace. There's little that many of the cities can do to increase the expediency and review process that are in place in many of our state and federal funding sources. But the pilot can help to expedite the public dialogue that helps shape the design element in our cities. And what we found here in Memphis is that more people are engaged in the public meetings when a pilot's put in place versus projects of a similar nature where there is no actual pilot. In some ways, the pilot project provokes people to be engaged in the process before the funding snowball has moved too far down the mountain and design changes are difficult to accommodate. The public dialogue that occurs as a result of the public process is crucial to the success of the program, and staff must be willing to show and demonstrate that the comments being received during the process are actually impacting the final design and outcome. And so there is a little bit of a give and take in this process that city staff have to rethink about how they're also delivering the services as well. A couple of examples that we've used here in Memphis. The very first pilot project that we actually had here in the city wasn't actually led by the city itself. Perhaps, though, what the city's greatest contribution to this project was that we stepped out of the way and allowed a group of business owners and community advocates to work through how the mechanisms that would go into place in creating the city's first successful pilot project here on Broad Avenue. So in late 2010, community leaders approached the city about restriping a 3-block section of the roadway to include protected bike lanes, on-street parking, and pedestrian curb extensions. Armed with donated buckets of interior latex paint from the local hardware store, and dozens of volunteers, the community members worked for 3 days to transform the street. The culmination of this was a 3-day festival to celebrate the changed street environment, complete with temporary pop-up shops, music, and a bicycle parade. In total, about 12,000 people came out to the event to witness the grand opening of this pilot project. All of the work performed here was consistent with engineering geometric standards, and the instant success of the project led city officials to commit to a partnership that ultimately led to raising $4.5 million for full construction of the protected bike lanes. Construction on several pieces of this corridor began this year, and subsequent phases will begin in late 2015. Inspired by the community-led work that took place on Broad Avenue, city officials worked in 2011 to create an official pilot program that could replicate the efforts that took place on Broad. This new program called MEMFIX, M-E-M-F-I-X, was first launched here on Cleveland Street. It's a location in the heart of the city that was undergoing a major design and improvement related to the redevelopment of a 1 million square foot warehouse that was being turned into a multi-story, mixed-use urban village. The development in the next 5 years will house residential units, artist studio space, 2 schools, doctor's offices, professional office space for 7 committed tenants already, but also the development is expected to lead to about 5,000 visitors each and every day. And trying to grasp and handle what the new traffic impacts might be on a space that's going to suddenly have 5,000 people in and around it every single day is a difficult task to undergo. We thought that the modeling that can be produced provided a good picture, but it wasn't complete enough, and that the MEMFIX, the temporary pilot program process, might be a good case for this neighborhood. So student volunteers worked with the city staff to install temporary protected bike lanes using spray chalk, construction zone lane marking tape, and you can see here in the photos the students laying out the buffer area for the protected bicycle lane. And the ultimate conclusion of this project is that the development team who was doing this 1 million square foot renovation of this building approved the idea to include protected bike lanes as a part of their design, and through the standard development approval process won permission to begin work. This work right now is under design and will begin construction next year. Our most recent pilot project is taking place along Riverside Drive in downtown Memphis. The city hired a consultant in 2013 to develop a riverfront development study, trying to identify areas along our riverfront of the Mississippi River that we were underutilizing, and how we can better provide access for our residents and visitors to this really great amenity that we have in downtown Memphis. That study concluded that the recommendation to transform Riverside Drive from a 4-lane divided highway to a more scenic route with slower traffic would free up some additional roadway space for the installation of a 2-way cycle track, and also allow for pedestrians crossing from the residential and business districts on the east side of the roadway to better access the amenity-based attractions on the west side of the roadway. Ultimately, there's a repaving plan for this road in the summer of 2015. We wanted to make sure that we had enough time to shape the public dialogue prior to reaching the point at which roadway construction was underway. And so we implemented in the spring of this year a pilot process that reduced the number of travel lanes from 4 to 2, moving all of the automobile vehicular traffic to one side of a median and allowing the other side to become a 2-way cycle track and pedestrian space, separated by the landscaped median in the middle. In order to accomplish this work, we used materials that were already available in our operations warehouse: paint, flexible posts, signs, planters, to alter about a 1-mile stretch of this corridor. As a result of the data collection, we're monitoring vehicular speeds, volumes, and crashes along this road, but also at about 10 other locations along parallel roads, making sure that the impacts of this road aren't having negative impacts on other roads in the downtown area. We're not just using pilot processes to build better bicycle facilities, but we're also implementing them on a smaller scale, looking at making small-scale pedestrian improvements. The same temporary approach is useful in our pedestrian planning activities, and it's allowing us to make rapid changes to the pedestrian environment with real-world impacts without having to build concrete structures. The simple use of paint, volunteers, planters are allowing communities and neighborhoods in Memphis to reclaim space once left for cars, now for the safe use of pedestrians throughout the city. In conclusion, I've just compiled a brief list of items to consider if you're hoping to put a pilot in place in your community. First, you're going to want to make sure that your pilot project is in place long enough that you can measure results. If you plan to conduct the pilot for too short a period of time, it may not have the desired impact of helping to shape public dialogue or allowing members of the community to revise their opinions of particular design elements. Second, pilots are great opportunities not just to try out new designs, but also new materials. Oftentimes, items that your city has laying around in its warehouses can be reused in creative ways to help facilitate pilot projects. Also, vendors will also donate small amounts of new materials in hopes that you'll purchase larger quantities in the future. Because pilots are smaller in scale generally than full-scale projects, this smaller donation from vendors is oftentimes ideal for this kind of application. This leads us to the next recommendation is how do you fund a pilot project? Generally here in Memphis, we're using our existing operations budget in addition to the materials we're sourcing from a variety of areas. As such, the pilot doesn't need its own line item in the budget or legislative approval to move forward. Finally, just some general thoughts. Collect data on everything, even if you think it won't be useful. It's always better to have more data on hand than not enough. And lastly, synergy between efforts can reap bigger rewards. Our MEMFIX program is a mixture of small business incubation, neighborhood redevelopment, and complete streets implementation. The synergy of these efforts has led to more successful pilot projects. If you're interested in the work that's happening in Memphis, you can visit our Biped Memphis website. Under the Projects tab, you'll find information related to our ongoing pilot projects. Thank you.
Kyle, thank you for an excellent presentation. We're going to go to Q&A now, so I will take the screen back. And before I do that, I would just like to remind everyone that if you're looking for continuing education for today's program, we have applied for CM credit, and you'll want to log your attendance on your site host's sign-in sheet, and we do need those completed sign-in sheets from the site host, so help them get that information to us. And if you need to download a certificate of attendance, you can do so. So with that, let's go ahead and open it up for Q&A. So I will start first with Anik. You mentioned that I believe you mentioned that the city manager had participated in the tour of the Netherlands. What role did that have in your ability to do rapid implementation?
He's city manager, and his focus is very broad. He did focus for 10 days, thanks to the Green Lane project, on bicycle infrastructure and a mature network, just to really live and breathe what that's like. And I think that really did a lot for his understanding. Our processes were rolling along internally, and I think that no news is good news from the city manager's office, right? So he's definitely aware. Anywhere you look in Austin, you see a bike lane, you see something happening. And we were able to move smoothly along, and I think that him just not asking questions and not being surprised by it was testament to him realizing what the end result, what we were trying to do. He kept saying it's in context for me now. So I don't know that if we ran into problems, it probably would have helped, but we were moving smoothly along, and I'm sure he was happy to see the progress.
Excellent, thank you. Another question for Anik from Franz of Bellingham, Washington. He wants to know about maintenance issues for your Austin cycle track example.
Yeah, we are not immune to maintenance issues, and we are certainly working through those. Trash pickup is one. the machine's ability to fit into these spaces when there's protection is definitely an issue that we're working. We don't have solutions yet, but we're working towards them. And they come from a lot of different places. They come with looking at possibly new vehicle purchases as our fleets come up for renewal, looking at different ways to do things, maybe new equipment purchases that are part of our capital program as well. So, we don't have snow, so we don't have those type of maintenance issues, but it's mostly trash pickup and sweeping. And so we don't have any solutions other than new equipment, really. But we can follow up offline if you'd like to contact me on more details.
All right, great. Thanks, Anik. And then a question for Kyle. Can you describe the public process you utilize in your pilots and at what phase of the decision or implementation process they were engaged, how frequent the engagement was, and what type of public engagement tools you utilize? That's a lot of questions, but a really important one.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first answer is it depends a little bit on the nature of the pilot process. For our Memphis program, that sort of combined Complete Streets implementation, pilot process, small business incubation event, that's typically an activity that takes place over a couple of months. Business leaders and neighborhood members are generally driving that process forward. And so as we're developing what the design of the pilot might actually look like, we have a number of stakeholders and community leaders that are with us over the span of a couple months helping to develop that plan. So there's quite a bit of front-end process with our Memphis events. Other projects like the Riverside Drive project aren't being driven through that sort of collaborative event. It's sort of a standalone pilot on itself. And our approach to that was a little bit different in that we announced that we were going to be doing a pilot several months before the pilot actually was implemented. We sent out a media release about it and did some initial interviews about it. But generally, we're letting the pilot itself serve as the spokesperson for the beginning of the public engagement process. And so with that kind of scenario, though, what's really important is that all of your follow-up and subsequent meetings are very clearly laid out, that the subject matter and the intent of those meetings is very clear. And so we're letting the pilot almost speak for itself and then programming sort of on the back end the more robust public dialogue about how do you, as a citizen or as a business owner or a property owner, how are you reacting to the pilot? Is it causing you any kind of difficulty? Do you see things that might be dangerous or unsafe? And then how do we, through that public dialogue process, reshape the conversation and make sure that we're accommodating and commenting on the element that you're bringing up as a result of the pilot, rather than thinking about what are the things you could think of that could go wrong on the back end. For that, how many meetings you have, I think, is a little bit up to the scope and nature of the project that you're actually working on. For our Riverside Drive project, which we implemented in June of this year, we've already had 2 follow-up meetings take place. We have at least one more happening in the spring, maybe an additional one, just depends on how many design details we can work through with the public. And so I think the important part is here that city staff has to remain flexible. If you need another public meeting, you've got to schedule another one. But it's all about that process and being the pilot allows you to be sort of contextually driven in terms of the approach, the design, and I think that the public process also has to be a little bit contextually driven.
Well, thank you, Kyle, and that was an excellent question from Nicole. And Rachel has a follow-up question about what sort of change in community engagement you see as you work through these pilot projects.
Yeah, so that's a really great question as well. The biggest and most sort of visible and tangible change in community engagement is that we actually have people showing up to the meetings, and not just the usual people that show up to all of your meetings, but people who aren't typically engaged in this kind of dialogue with a traditional planning process. So I remember when we did our first meeting for Riverside Drive, our director of engineering asked the question, how many of you were at the meeting, the presentation where we presented that we were going to be doing this pilot project? And almost no hands went up in an audience of about 100 people. And the point was that on the front end, we'd had a public meeting where we were talking about the concepts and the designs, but it wasn't until we actually put the pilot in place that people were actually motivated, whether they liked it or didn't like it, to actually come to a public meeting. So we're getting good responses and a good number of people to actually come to the meeting. The other thing that's a little bit different is that the kinds of comments that you will receive as a result of a pilot, I've noticed have changed in that if you're through the traditional process, you might be proposing a design element, and somebody might think in their head of a situation where that won't work, or it won't work in this situation, sort of in a very arbitrary way, just through the use of their imagination and their personal experiences. But with the pilot in place, they're actually able to tangibly utilize, visualize, see, and touch and feel that change already on the ground. And so the kinds of comments that you get are just a little bit, they're nuanced in a different way, but they are much more reflective of actually what's happening as a result of the pilot. And so it actually allows our engineers and our city staff to really be more direct and deliberate with making changes to the design that are individually addressing the concerns that continue to come up. And as you collect data over time, some of those concerns can be alleviated, some of them go away. And so it demonstrates, I think, also to the public that, hey, this isn't a one direction kind of production. It's not just the city providing an opportunity for you to come and air your grievances. It's that opportunity for you to come and comment on a project, and then to the city on the back end as a part of that reciprocal relationship to say, here, we've heard you, here's how we've made the changes, what's the next issue? And as you begin to go through that particular project, the discussion just changes over the period of time.
Well, Kyle and Anik, that particular discussion about public engagement is really helpful and useful and plays into one of the advanced questions that we received that we asked both of you to take a look at. And it had to do with what role visualization materials play in building consensus in the community. So I would first ask Kyle to address that, and then Anik to add additional comments.
Sure. So regarding the role of visualization materials, I would say that for Memphis, one of the reasons that we're implementing pilot projects is for that pilot to actually serve as the ultimate visualization tool, to demonstrate how the infrastructure changes are going to impact the surrounding environment, what expectations people might have with a recommended kind of improvement. There's a general concern here internally that in a traditional planning process that the graphics, renderings, charts, tables, pictures, all those kinds of issues aren't doing enough to really move public opinion towards supporting a particular project, especially in the early design phases. And that the pilot implementation actually allows the city officials to move the starting point of the public dialogue to a place where people are reacting to a pilot rather than to sort of an intangible concept. That's really providing much more robust dialogue and ultimately providing more insightful design solutions as a part of that. So we still continue to use graphics and cross-sections and maps, during the public engagement process, but ultimately we're letting the pilot speak for itself as the best example of visualization that we can provide.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree that Austin is its own laboratory on having the innovative facilities on the ground that neighborhoods and others can think about. They've either driven by it or they've gone to a friend's house where they've seen something like what is being proposed possibly in their neighborhood, and so that's worked well for us. The more you get them on the ground, the more living laboratories you have. Visualization often is expensive. That's been our experience in Austin. There's been a lot of specific projects that were the more lengthy projects that had a lot of public concern, that needed a lot of public process, where we did employ graphics or more sophisticated visualization that I think definitely helps. I think it's specific to the project and what the public wants. Sometimes it works well, sometimes not so much. I think we definitely just, took the pulse of the community during the public process to see if we thought it might be helpful, and then tried to do it because, like I said, the various, it can get expensive. So the best way is to have pilot projects or things on the ground that are real. But it hasn't been a key. I would say that it's not a key component to buy-in for implementation of our projects. So if you're thinking in your community that might be the key, it hasn't been our experience in Austin. Like I said, just if it's requested or seems to be the majority request through a public process, then it could be helpful.
Thanks, Anik. And Vicki and Nicole have asked a really tough and important question, and that is whether either Austin or Memphis has ever pulled out completely after a pilot ends, or if that pilot was not successful.
Kyle, you want to take that first, or you want me to take it?
You can go first, Anik.
Oh boy. Yeah. Like I said, we haven't used the pilot concept as outwardly as Memphis. So I think Kyle's answer is probably going to be a better one. We have definitely changed, our approach to a project and changed our minds and design of projects through all of the processes that I described after public comment, but not after the project had been piloted, because we, like I said, we're more the standard approach to, have a concept, have some sort of leveraging that's, the conduit to instigating the project, and then we go through our public process. So we've definitely changed projects before they got on the ground. We've definitely backed off some projects before, but not after piloting. So that hasn't been our experience. Kyle?
Yeah, so here in Memphis, thus far, we have never backed out of a project post-pilot program. What I will say is that when we do a pilot program and then we are nearing the end of the final design and moving towards construction, never have we had a final design that directly imitated the pilot design that was in place. And I think that's really the point of this. Is that we're not recommending that the pilot itself be the final design, the end-all, be-all. It demonstrates a level of flexibility and accommodation on behalf of city officials who are working on the design. So, for instance, on Broad Avenue, the pilot there was a one-way protected bicycle lane on each side of the street with on-street parking. As a result of the public dialogue that went place there was the need to accommodate some more parking spots for particular business owners that design wasn't really going to allow us to accommodate. So the final design that's being constructed right now is actually a two-way cycle track that's on one side of the street. It allowed us to pick up the necessary parking spots on the other side of the street, and everybody was happy. And so I think that sort of flexibility and that willingness to say, hey, we have this concept. We want to protect people that are riding bicycles. We want to implement protected bicycle lanes. We want to help calm the traffic. We want to help make pedestrian crossings easier and safer for everybody that's on foot. As long as the philosophy behind the design is the same, we sort of feel here at the City of Memphis that the final design can be shaped by that public dialogue in a more robust way.
Thank you, Kyle. And then a follow-up question on some of the slides that you showed. Beth wants to know if there were any safety, union, or other concerns about using volunteer labor.
Yes, which is the short answer. However, aside from the Broad Avenue pilot, which was really sort of community-led and driven, all of the programs that the city is now involved in, all of the volunteer efforts are being handled under the watchful eye of city staffers. And so we put up temporary traffic control devices when the implementation requires it, and we require all this kinds of same kinds of safety gear. So I would say that we have a pretty liberal sort of approach to handling sort of like the liability or risk that might be involved with that. We're not being negligent in it, but we also are providing the flexibility that allows really for the pilots to actually take place.
Well, thank you, Kyle, and Anik, great presentations. We have come to the end of our webinar today. APBP thanks the Green Lane Project as well as our presenters. We did receive a few additional advanced questions that offer a good deal of food for thought about continuing this series into 2015, issues related to particular jurisdictions and widths, and Tim has asked a question about a two-way facility, so much food for thought for future webinars. Thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. We do hope that you'll have a chance to look at the others in this series and that you'll join us again in 2015. With that, I wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you.